Hi, I'm Ronan Patel. For my presentation, I'm going to be talking about users' privacy practices with end-user license agreements, or EULAs. So first, a quick introduction. End-user license agreements, or EULAs, are everywhere in our digital life. According to Contracts Council, these are legal contracts between software suppliers and the users, detailing rights and restrictions of software use. However, many people blindly accept these agreements without fully reading them first. A study by Carnegie Mellon University found that it would take 76 entire workdays for an average person to read all the privacy policies they agree to in a single year. My research aims to examine the current level of awareness among people regarding EULAs and their behavioral changes in response to learning more about these agreements. So the importance of understanding end-user license agreements is underscored by their implications for privacy. Today, every click, every acceptance of terms and conditions has the potential to impact our digital footprint and privacy. Despite this, there's a significant gap in the research, especially concerning how users change their behavior in responses to EULAs. This gap not only reflects the scarcity of research focusing on behavioral changes, but also the need for a greater understanding of the dynamics between EULA comprehension and user action. The aim of my study is to assess the awareness and behavioral changes concerning EULAs. How much do users really understand, and how does this understanding affect their actions? This leads to my research question: will a brief intervention about EULAs improve user privacy practices in response? So for the literature review, studies by Boot and Bealey highlight a concerning reality. On the off chance that someone does choose to read a EULA, the average user spends only 14 minutes reading a typical one, which raises doubts about our comprehension of these contracts and their wider implications. Additionally, the evolution of EULAs parallels technological and legal advancements. While they used to be minimal, primarily targeting intellectual property protection as noted by Knopf in their 2006 study, EULAs have become more intricate and globally accessible, often overwhelming people with dense legal jargon and complex clauses. A study conducted by Bond shows that a staggering 92% of people do not read EULAs with the diligence they deserve, with 22% just bypassing them entirely. This gap in understanding, exacerbated by the dense legal jargon, creates significant confusion and poses risks. Not fully grasping EULAs can lead users into agreements that misalign with their personal or ethical beliefs, as Komienic suggests. In an era where personal data protection is so important, many EULAs reserve the rights to collect, process, or share user data in ways that might be intrusive or exploitative, which raises concerns about breaches of trust and privacy. In addressing this change, Kobler and others call for EULAs to be written in more plain language, enhancing user comprehension through visual clarity with icons or diagrams, and dynamic EULAs that engage users with interactive platforms for real-time clarifications, like a chat with someone live. Research methodologies in this field are pretty minimal. Sang employs broad spectrum surveys, while Flick, Weckert, and Lucas explore experimental approaches to evaluate how different EULA designs influence comprehension. However, there's been little research done on the interventional aspect of EULAs and how users feel about them before and after they learn what a EULA really is and what they are blindly agreeing to. So for my method, in addressing the question of how well Brophy students understand and react to EULAs, my study will use an interventional approach, which is typically used in the medical field, but it's also highly applicable in educational research settings as well. Interventional studies are powerful because they don't just observe subjects in a passive state, they actively engage participants and measure the effect of specific variables, in this case the increase of knowledge in regards to EULAs. By educating participants about EULAs and then measuring any changes in their attitudes and behaviors, I can directly assess the impact of increased awareness and understanding. This method is suitable for this study because it allows me to observe potential shifts in a perspective in a controlled and measurable way. So this is the intervention I used between the pre and post-intervention questions. It's pretty short, not too long. It's about 5 paragraphs talking about the definition and importance of EULAs, common EULA clauses, reading EULAs and why it matters, data selling and unethical practices, and a couple case studies when users were taken advantage of by the EULAs they agreed to. So in continuation from my methods, I designed a structured survey using Google Forms, as you saw on the last slide, which included both open-ended and closed-ended questions. This approach not only facilitated a comprehensive analysis of statistical trends, but also provided deeper insights into participants' thoughts and feelings about EULAs. Initially, participants completed the survey to gauge their baseline understandings and attitudes. After this, an educational intervention was conducted, after which the same participants completed the second half of the survey. This pre- and post-intervention method allows a clear comparison and a robust analysis on how educational interventions can modify perceptions and behaviors regarding EULAs. This method has been proven effective in similar research, such as in Komienek's study that found that many users disagree with the complexity of EULAs to identify specific themes across the board. So, as always, ethical considerations are a top priority. Everyone had to sign an informed consent form at the beginning of the form, and all responses were anonymous from start to finish. So for my results section, I'll just briefly talk about what everything means, and then in the discussion section, I'll talk about the implications for them. So in my survey, I had 114 total responses, all Brophy students. As you can see here, the demographics, most of the students were juniors, people in my class, and then there was second most was sophomores, and then freshmen, and then seniors last. But it's pretty dispersed because there's 114 people. And then the question about race, it's pretty reflective of Brophy student body, so a lot of white or Caucasian students, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, Black or African American, and then there was one American Indian or Alaskan Native student. And then I asked students about their political affiliation from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most liberal to 5 being the most conservative. And as you can see here, it's pretty evenly dispersed and normally distributed. So I wasn't worried about potential bias through that in my survey. And then I asked students if they were a STEM or a humanities-focused student or both. Most people indicated that they were a STEM-focused student because when I sent out the form, I had a brief description, and people that clicked on my survey were probably going to be STEM-focused students. And then for the quantitative results, I asked this question is about their current approach to EULAs, and then after the intervention, how they'll approach EULAs in the future. So obviously, as you can see, 3/4 of people said they just blindly click agree to the EULAs, which is a lot more than even the literature review suggests. About 1/4 of the people said they skimmed the EULA, and 1 person said they read the entire thing. And then after the intervention, you can see that the yellow increased drastically to, a lot of people said that they were going to skim the EULA now about practices about privacy and privacy. And then the people that said they would blindly click agree decreased by a lot. So, and in this question, I asked 3 questions similar to this on a Likert scale format this is about the legal implications of EULAs before and after the intervention. In this question, on average, there was a 64.22% increase. So as you can see, it's a pretty opposite graph. So it shows how much it really affects people. And then the next question I asked, how important do they think understanding EULAs is for your privacy? So a lot of people thought that it was the same, or pretty much the same before and after, so that question only observed a 6.84% increase on average. And then in the last question, I asked users to say, agree with the statement, EULAs are easy to understand, and that increased by 21% after the intervention. So this is a lot of numbers, but it determines the correlations between the demographics that I addressed earlier and the changes in questions 1, 2, and 3, like the questions on the last slide. So on average, I determined on average the percent changes, and then did a correlation coefficient between that and the demographics for each question. I'll explain more about this in the discussion section. And then for the qualitative results, I asked open-ended questions as an optional question, and I compiled through a thematic analysis. I determined some common themes about the responses, and a lot of people said they disagree with the EULA's complexity and length. They were they didn't understand why they had to agree to unfavorable terms for the users. They understood the importance of reading EULAs, and about 8 of them were just negative, like, I hate EULAs, or just some things that high school students would say about them. So for the discussion, I'm just going to be talking a little more in depth about it. So in this question, as you can see, just a simple intervention from 5 paragraphs talking about how privacy can impact you, changed people's perceptions and said that, wow, really I need to look about the sections that talk about my privacy and what companies are selling, what they're doing with my data and selling it. So, it aligns with the literature because a lot of people said that they would now read the EULA because of the data selling was a major part. And then for this question, it's pretty much the same thing. Just a short intervention can change so much, such as in Komianik's study, they said the same thing. And in the correlations, I was expecting to get more out of this. I thought that I could determine a correlation between the change and something like GPA. But since the correlations are so little in every single category, it allowed me to kind of expand this and say there is a lot of people that it's not just focused on a single population, and it can be generalized to a wider group. And then for the qualitative results, people just agreed with the literature. For the majority, they just said they're long, I don't like them, stuff like that. So in conclusion, my research underscores the significant impact that targeted educational interventions can have on students' understanding of EULAs. Aligning with initiatives such as the U.S. Department of Education's Digital Literacy Accelerator, my findings highlight the critical role in education in enhancing digital navigation skills. Furthermore, consistent with current research by scholars like Vanessa Bond, this study confirms that the complexity and length of EULAs are major barriers to user engagement. To overcome these challenges, a dual approach is recommended, not only enhancing digital literacy education, like how Myers and Adams' Buddy suggests, but also advocating for the simplification of EULAs to make them more accessible and understandable, similar to Young's conclusion on his linguistic simplification study. This dual strategy addresses the persistent skepticism towards EULAs and supports a broader systemic change in formulation and presentation. That's it.
Thanks, Ronan. Just a few questions, and then we'll wrap it up. So for the first one, because you did a mixed method, you generated an enormous amount of data. So how did you determine within that data, like what was important to show us for your new understanding?
Yeah, so for the questions that had to do with the quantitative results, I picked to show you the graph that had the most drastic change, although a couple of the other ones still did have a big change. I decided to show that one because it showed how much a simple intervention can change something. But for the qualitative results, I decided to make that question optional when I was making my survey because I knew that it would take a really long time to do an analysis of every single question in combination with my quantitative results. So I decided to compile those into simple thematic analysis just to show this is how people feel about them just more generally.
How did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
Yeah, so because the major thing for my limitations was that the correlations were so little, I was expecting more of something like a higher weighted GPA to be a smaller change because people would more likely have more knowledge about end user license agreements and their privacy. So I thought that, I hypothesized that I would have more of a correlation between those two things, a negative correlation. But then I realized from those limitations that it can be interpreted to a wider audience instead of just focused on a singular group.
All right, so I want you to think back to the initial curiosity that sparked your inquiry. What other curiosities do you have now, and how has this process prepared you to explore them?
Yeah, so I was first interested in this topic because I was thinking, I saw a study that said, like, people were really against EULAs and what they entail for them. And now after my research, I saw kind of a similar thing, but I also saw how people, it was like surprisingly similar to my research in that people were like, why can't it be written more simply, or why can't they just summarize stuff? And I think that now, like, maybe more research should be done to a wider group on how just a simpler EULA, like without all the legal jargon, can help people understand them more and help them learn more about their privacy implications without having like a law degree where you have to be able to understand all the terms.